a leader in the MIT Media Lab. Tonight's topic is in particular is about designing computing support for activities that don't require and command our entire attention. So we're looking at designing computing experiences to help us in the periphery of our work, in the periphery of our communications, and there's more here that we could pull out, but I'm happy to hand the mic over to Ted Selker.
Hi, everyone, and welcome. I'm Ted Selker. I am CTO of AlfyCo, a company that thinks about how to help people with their communication. Everybody can see me. Is that this slide?
Yep.
And tonight I'm going to talk about peripheral computing. It's the goal of such is to make interfaces that blend with the world. And this is a sleeve I'll talk about a little later that recognizes whether you're working out or whether you're dancing. So we're getting to the point where we can recognize such things. Let's see, how do I go on there? So peripheral computing is a term I kind of been working with some other people on, and I kind of teased us and saying, hey, there's so many different kinds of computing. Ubiquitous computing is all the things around us that have computing in them, and pervasive is IBM started talking about it when they were talking about supporting all of these things with infrastructure. Ambient computing, I think of as things that are in space, in the environment around us, and have computing in them. The Internet of Things is such things that are online. And peripheral computing, I distinguish as being something that's not the primary focus. So the point is that you are thinking about other things maybe than the specific thing that the computer cares about. It might be that there's secondary perceptual and effector systems that they're secondary to what you're doing, or activities. And the question is, are there other things that you are subconscious of, like that the ceiling might break and fall on you, that you know what you would do if it happened? This particular picture shows a smart floor that I made in this case it was in a museum exhibit. There's a book that I edited with a couple of other friends, Peripheral Interaction, and it kind of goes into some of this stuff, and the topics are there on the left. But the point of the whole idea is that interfaces have been very egocentric. Somehow they expect that we're going to understand all the error codes they put back at us, that we're going to pay attention to them. And it maybe worked a little bit well with an office or a cubicle. Now we are literally using computers in every social circumstance we're involved with. And in that regard, maybe we have to really start realizing that the computer is not necessarily able to know when we're going to be paying attention to it. So the talk is going to have these four parts. I'm going to talk about ubiquitous peripheral devices, pervasive, ambient, and I'm going to end with how AI can support peripheral computing. On the right, you see a picture of a screen from the Alfy app that I helped make, and it's really this particular page was our attempt to have a mirror. So while you're doing things that are probably advancing yourself in your career or whatever, it's giving you this way of seeing how well you're doing. So this is not what you're doing. It's how you look to yourself. Are you kind, optimistic, ambitious, or brave, for example? But I'm going to start by showing examples of ubiquitous things. Here's me on Good Morning America with Diane Sawyer. And she's noticing that there needs to be more salt in her pancake batter. So the idea of what I call advisory agents is ones that teach you. They don't do things for you, but they help you understand the environment you're working in. So by teaching you that you should put more salt in this as opposed to putting in salt for you, it's doing that. And this one can sense gooiness, and it can sense temperature, and it can sense pressure, and so you can tell whether your eggs are getting stiff and things like that. So the idea is that this has these sensors, but it's literally chiming in on the side. Another example of something that one of my students did is he made a game where when you catch the ball, it measures your heart rate. And to the extent that your heart rate is going down, your team gets more points. So it's kind of a counterintuitive thing that makes it so, you probably want to run around the field before you get the ball, and then, have your team members keep you from getting tickled so that you can, zen in and lose heart rate as you go. So this is fun because it kind of gives you more understanding and access to a new kind of strategy, but also it's sensing something we usually aren't so aware of, that is our heart rate. This is an example that got in Bicycling Magazine at some point. Now there's starting to be things a little bit like it, but the point is that this helmet mediates communication from the environment to us. So when you go over a bump, it will record that place and whatever you said about that place. If there was a pothole or if you fell or whatever the reason is. And if you scream some obscenity, it covers up that with 130 decibel horn. And if you tip your head, it turns on blinkers. So the point is that it's kind of a little bit more command and control than what I think of mostly for these peripheral things, except that it's really allowing you to keep your eyes on the road and your hands on the wheel while you're driving. And that's kind of a different direction than a lot of the driving support things that we think of being part of our world are. So this one is literally trying to integrate your work, be helpful to you without taking your attention away from what you're doing. This is something called IR. And IR is about identity, but it used infrared to look at your eye with one sensor. And what I loved about this is we were able to, with one sensor, recognize what, with context, whether you were winking or blinking or staring or gazing or eyes were opened or closed. And what it did is if you looked at a demo and you showed interest in it, it would email you that demo. If you looked at another person and you showed interest in them by staring at them a little bit, it would send their email. It'd send them your email so that they could get in touch with it if they wanted to. So the point is that by really thinking hard about the context and using very simple sensors, sometimes we can do things where we can bring extra information, extra function to bear on a situation. This is that sleeve I was wearing earlier, and it has some gesture recognition, so it can tell if you're lifting weights and count your repetitions. Watch if you're dancing, tell if you're fidgeting, and try to do appropriate things with the lights and maybe by counting. So the point is using an extra sensor, but fitting into the environment and not changing what you're doing. So I want to talk now about pervasive computing. So this is stuff that's built into the environment. In the environment, we could have this floor I built, where this floor literally can tell what the configuration of people is around the room. And if there's a person over there, it might make some little steps over to them to try to introduce the two of us. If I'm the only person in one place and everybody else is somewhere else, it turns the spotlight on me and lets me give my lecture. If I walk to a part of the lab and nobody's there, but there's a demo there, it'll run the demo for me. So maybe it'll even find my keys. I mean, this is not looking far-fetched anymore, but the idea of a sensing floor can do a lot of things, work in different scenarios, and anticipate our needs a little bit. We made a vending machine, and the point of the vending machine is maybe the most important thing about a vending machine is that it's going to sell the soda, but the way we get people interested in it is as you walk up to it, this vending machine makes a game for you to play, and it can tell how many people are in front of it, and so engages you. Maybe when you're far away from it, it actually puts up some of the news or what gates the different airplanes are at. So we tried all of these things, but the point is that we're really trying to have an interface that is engaging you not with the primary task, but with something else that will eventually actually support the primary task, because people actually find vending machines that are just glaring at you saying they're Pepsi, 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 a little bit off-putting. We made a bunch of explorations in kitchens where one of the most interesting things about this kitchen that we learned was if that picture of what's in the refrigerator is always on the refrigerator, people didn't pay attention to it much. But if when you walk towards the refrigerator, it shows a picture of what's inside the refrigerator, people opened it less often. If when you opened the freezer, it looked like a snowstorm, you closed the freezer much quicker. Little wind blowing, you get goosebumps. It was kind of fun. And within that kitchen, we had a smart sink. And one of the fun things about that smart sink that Kaiser was interested in at one point was if you washed your hands, the camera would notice. And then if you washed them long enough, it would let the door close to the examining room. So the examining room became an examining room when you exhibited the correct behavior that you as a practitioner should do before examining a person. It also did things like if you put a pot under the sink, it'd put in hot water. If you put vegetables under it, it'd put cold water. If you put your hands under it, make warm water to wash them. So it's trying to be context aware, but using these extra sensors to change the way that this environment acts towards you. We made a lot of office furniture where the wall was painted with what looks like a desktop, really. And what you do is you take a tablet, you point at that window, and you'd be looking at the web, or you'd point at the calendar on the wall, and you'd be looking at a much more detailed view of the calendar. So what's on the wall is low resolution, but what's in front of you is high resolution. So this is the idea of bringing things in the peripheral vision up to you, making that desktop metaphor literally be that any room you want, you can paint with to be any kind of office you want. So the physical things in our offices are not so important anymore, but the idea of placing things spatially, method of loci tells us, and many other things tell us, is still a valuable thing. This is actually the table. It actually went to the Olympics to show off these ideas, but that's another story. So one of the more complicated things we built was something that when you're doing physical therapy, it would notice whether people were distracting you or not, whether they were helping you or not, and be aware of how to give you some feedback, some candy if you did a good job. And so this really integrated all of these different devices to support somebody in physical therapy, counting their reps and so on, and treating the doctor that walks in and is trying to help you differently than your aunt that's haranguing you about the loan you haven't paid back to her, or whatever is distracting you from your physical therapy at the moment. So this idea of pervasive computing is kind of things in the environment. Ambient computing is things all around us. And so here I am in a bed, again on Good Morning America. And what happens is if I close my eyes, the ceiling kind of goes quiet. If I'm looking drowsy, it puts stars up in the sky. If I wake up in the morning, my eyes are open, it turns off the alarm. And so I can actually make selections, play games, read email and stuff, just using eye tracking while laying in bed. And it's kind of a fun thing because laying in bed, you've got a nice stable support for your head. It works much better actually than a lot of other places that we could use eye tracking. And so the actual question that we come to is, as we're building this world where things in the periphery do things with us and come to our forefront when appropriate, the question is how are we going to understand and take care of those problems? So here are some AI examples that I'm really proud of. This is an early one where we tried all sorts of sensors like galvanic skin response and stuff. And what we found is that the best way to tell what Andrea Lockhart was doing when she was taking videos, she was walking around Red Square, near Harvard Square, where the red line comes through, and she was videotaping people and things. And what we discovered was when she giggled while she was taking the videos, that was the indication that she was interested in the video. And so one time during the hour when she was videoing, she was videotaping somebody videotaping her. That was kind of funny. Another time she was videotaping some people playing drums on pots and pans near the subway entrance. And there was a couple of other times. And so this thing can do automatic editing by recognizing this this other kind of sensor than you would, nothing you have to press on explicitly, but rather implicit communication that is afforded by her actions. So the question is, when can AI be considerate? And when I'm talking or doing or thinking, should it be paying attention, or it should be letting me focus on talking and doing and thinking? What are the rules for social engagement? The fact is, now when we're using everything in a social setting with these phones, these supercomputers that are out there in the world with us, actually, when they communicate to us, they should be paying attention to the social rules of engagement, because to the extent that they break those rules, they're going to distract us deeply, because we don't work very well when things are inappropriate. And maybe they have to be a little bit more affirming. Maybe they have to be more listening. And what is this whole question of peripheral anyway? So there's a million things that could happen in my environment around me, and I'm still able to focus on giving this talk. I mean, what if a deer were to crash through the window, into this room? I would probably, shoo it out. But I wouldn't. And I have all sorts of, subroutines, things that I know what to do about that could solve various problems. But I'm not thinking about them at all. I'm just thinking about what my engagement is right now, and I'll deal with them when they come up. And the question is that, social success requires appropriate responses, and that's the why. So one of the early things we did was made something called Disruption Manager. And Disruption Manager, Ernesto Arroyo made, where basically you're sitting there and this background behind these two red boxes is a desktop where you were getting orders that were being that you were supposed to take, and you were getting emails about these orders, and you had a spreadsheet you had to fill out about it, and you had a calculator you had to use to find out the amount that you were going to charge a customer, and you get text messages that were social or maybe from your boss. And what we found was when we were using AI to mediate these communications, we got a 25% performance increase. Let me explain what I mean. So what happened is we had a model of disruption. So if a message comes in and it's about the thing you're doing right now, it comes right through. If you're busy typing or talking to somebody, it might be delayed. If it is similar to another message that's being delayed, it might be grouped with that one. If it is higher priority than one that's being waited on, it might go forward. So just by automatically delaying them up to 2 minutes and organizing them relative to the tasks you were working on, we were able to make an AI system that could increase your performance. That means you took a lot more orders. Or if we said, don't worry about taking a lot of orders, just make your orders perfect and never make a mistake, it reduced the amount of errors people made by about that much too. And we actually put Disruption Manager on the text messaging for kids at Wellesley for a little bit, and they hated it when we turned it off. That was kind of fun. So don't have statistics on that right here. So that's kind of an interesting idea, is that maybe things shouldn't come through all the time. Maybe they should come through when they're appropriate. And so what is this business of social actors? So the idea is that when you're communicating, there's a lot of things that communicate what you are communicating that are separate from the text you're giving, or the the language you're using. There's your mutual gaze, there's how close you're sitting to the person, there's the gesturing you're doing, and basically there's what I'm looking towards is a time when the computers are aware of your social commitments and limitations, to allow it to not be making social blunders. So, what should we do when we have an opportunity to communicate with a person for a computer? We want to recognize that, we have to inform and negotiate relationships. What does that mean when a computer's informing and negotiating? It's kind of like that thing I just told you. It's really deciding when it's inappropriate for it to communicate with the person, maybe. And the question is, what is appropriate social feedback? Is it as in this Tesla that I was driving the other day, when it just kept beeping and beeping and beeping, and there was no way to find out what the beeping is? That's not appropriate. It has to be discoverable. It has to be able to explain itself. If the car is sick, I should be able to find out why it's sick, or what it means to be sick, or say, I don't care if you're sick, stop belly aching. But that is not negotiating when it's refuses to change any of that. And really the question is, to reduce cognitive and affective load, we have to think about what is pertinent and valuable to communicate. We want to do it in a thoughtful and caring way, and we want it to be receptive and reciprocal. We don't want it to be distracting. We don't want it to be disruptive. We don't want it to be condescending, which most computer interfaces, like that beeping of the darn beeping. It's the least informative and most annoying thing it could do, that my Tesla was doing. And we don't want it to be hostile or manipulative. Putting a big blap. An awful lot of web pages just put a blap up in front of you while you're trying to load a web page these days, and it's not new. There've been lots of hostile and manipulative things that computers have done over the years. So one of the ways we kind of explored this reducing social mistakes was with some experiments about collaboration. So now we're thinking about using AI to help human communication, not just human computer communication. And in one experiment, we thought about all of the ways that people make mistakes when they're collaborating, and the ones that are highlighted, those are the ones that we thought we could do something about. Meeting was not too well facilitated, too much extraneous noise, and so on. And so here's some experiments that we did to explore that. And this is Raoul Rajan's PhD thesis. And what we did is, in one example, we had this chess game, and we're very close to the end of the chess game. It's kind of a check or checkmate situation. And we have these people discussing what they're on one side. I think they got, they're black or something. And you can see that this green line here is because one of the people is dominating the conversation. And what we say to that person is turn taking. And when we say that, you see his domination, or hers, plummets. And I say that because there was this is statistically significant. We had 12 groups of people do this. And what happened is their contribution reduced, and the people that were not speaking, any thoughts? We said that to them, and they started contributing. They went from 0 up to 30-40%. And what was nice is that their collaboration, while it dropped off a little bit, they continued to be part of a collaboration, as opposed to being completely dominated by this person that was thought they had the idea of how to fix this chess thing. We tried other things. We tried when there was noise in the background, we tried having either the person say, hey, could you turn down the microphone? Or we had the computer say it. And
noisy.
When it said noisy, instead of having a person say it, basically they had half the communication errors. This is in a game where they were supposed to be playing hangman and deciding what letter to put next in the hangman. We did another experiment relative to these problems people have, with collaboration, where we wanted to see how do you evaluate who's here, and a typical
John has entered the meeting.
Typical telephone conferencing systems, you've probably heard them say things like that before. And I thought, oh, wouldn't it be great if instead we had an iconic kind of an ear icon kind of thing, where we had a door slam and the person's name that had come in through the door, and we tried that, and
John.
It was no better. The error rates of who was in the meeting was not really any statistically better. But when we tried a metaphor of leaving or entering being a statement or a question, we got half the number of errors. And let me play you what that sounds like. Here's Ted coming in, John, and here's him leaving.
John.
It's just a little question mark at the end. And that little question mark at the end, people interpreted very easily. It was less disruptive, is what I believe is the reason. And they were able to get lower errors. So anyway, we did a bunch of these things, and I'm going through them because they're just kind of a little bit. I'm not going to bother with that one. They're a little bit counterintuitive, and there's some papers about them. You can find them on my Vita on my website if you want. Now, some of what we did with these ideas is we said, well, what would it be like in a video conferencing system? And so we made this thing. I made this thing. I started a little company that is now not doing very much. That watches people while they're in a conference call. And what we did is, when we have a little AI that's going along and noticing if one person's speaking a lot and giving some of that feedback we talked about on the last slide, that when they're speaking too much, making them aware when there's noise in the background, making them aware when they aren't contributing in a way that'll help them take charge. But also it gives this bars, and these bars show you that this purple guy has been speaking for a little bit, and before him there was the green and purple guy talking at the same time, and earlier the green person got a chance to speak a little bit. But you can see how there's a progression of the conversation where the green person spoke a bunch at the beginning, and now the purple guy is getting to speak. So it's giving you a feeling for the whole meeting's direction. If you guys want to play with it, go to c3.chat. It's yet another video conferencing system. I'm not sure that anybody wants to try another one these days, but it's fun because it uses these considerate systems and these peripheral cues to try to make people aware of some of the communication styles and that they have, and to improve them based on some of the statistically significant research that we've done. So another thing that we did at MIT is we had this empathy buddy, we called it, and it's there's a nice paper about it that people thought was good. And what was interesting is we had a little we used common sense reasoning to recognize something about what was being written. And the last thing a person says, I went skydiving last Saturday outside New York, and it looked surprised. And what we found was, when we used a pictogram that showed that the person was surprised instead of text, that they were much more likely to change their email. And so that became very interesting to us. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. Another thing that we did is we made an email system that I'm quite proud of, because what happened is we made a big mistake. The things that were urgent, we marked as orange, and the things that were not so urgent, we marked as green. People responded more to the ones that were urgent. But I was realizing later, maybe I should have colored the things that you want to work on as green and the things you don't want to work on as red. So what I really enjoy about that statement is this idea that actually getting the UI perfect wasn't as important as making people aware of urgency of an email. So we had a little AI that would say, okay, this is somebody that you respond to all the time. This is a brand new person you're just being introduced to. This is just a normal conversation that you have. We have some classifications. We did some machine learning to establish. But I really want to underscore this idea that sometimes the point of the user interface is things being distinguishable and people understanding them. And what was especially interesting about this email example, too, is that our machine learning wasn't perfect. And so we were only under 70% correct about whether something was urgent or not. And still people were better at making their decisions about which they looked at the same number of emails as in a normal email system with normal subject lines, but with this ransom note interface, as I like to call it, they actually were better at choosing the ones that were important to them to select. So the question is it, when is function more important than beauty? And maybe we underestimate how well people are, how good people are at using whatever we give to expose something important to them in an interface. So that's a kind of a cautionary table. I'm not going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about some of the feedback that's been given in various communication, because the rest of this talk is about this issue of how to help people with their communication using AI. So back in the beginning, a guy named George Heidorn made something called Pettit, and he underlined suggestions all over the text on IBM email systems and text editing systems, and improve people's writing. And then along came Emacs and Gmail with things like text completion. Text completion has been around for since the 70s, quite frankly, but it's gotten better. And what's happened is that when you're writing an email, unlike an advisory agent that teaches you, these ones that do text completion say, I could write the sentence better for you, or I could finish the sentence for you. And they're doing a masterful job in Gmail at doing that. I hope it makes people better at writing instead of worse. Another example of something trying to give feedback for is Clippy. And what I found especially surprising about it was they somehow decided to have a wiggling off on the periphery. And the peripheral vision really is attracted to things that move. It also would often tell you what something was for, not how to solve the problem. And so what happened is you were working over here, and Clippy would take your attention over to there, and then it wouldn't solve a problem for you. And you know that it didn't do very well in the marketplace, even though it had some of the top sociologists in the world working on how to make the look and feel right. It was breaking social norms. It was taking your attention away from what you wanted to be focusing on, and it wasn't sure enough that it was giving you a solution for you to really recognize whether you should bother looking over at it or not. Now, Coach was a system that actually was my PhD, and it was used in OS2 to highlight things that you were working on. So if you were doing something like installing a printer or doing something complicated on the user interface, it would highlight, and it used information that was on and near what you were doing to help you with it. And it used AI to decide whether it should help you at the novice, intermediate, professional, or expert level. And people got 5 times more done when we turned that thing on with these scrims that cover up the things that you shouldn't be paying attention to if you're a novice, than if they didn't. By the way, if you clicked on any of them, it would bring up the script and the help for the thing that would use those buttons. So somehow it even ships today in this, I don't know, operating system that no one uses. So more recently, and in fact, right now, I'm working on something called Alfie Reflect. And we are watching as you're doing your work, and we're watching the language you're using and trying to decide what another person might think of what you're saying. So let's go into that a little bit more. So this is an example of using Alfie Reflect in this Alfie app, where if a person said men are dumber, it says inclusive, and it has this icon that's a man and a woman. And if you'd say, am I making sense? It'll put up a kind of a neutral look that says, is this clear? And so you can reflect on whether you could make a simpler or more direct statement that then am I making sense? Because there's a bit of a diminishing nature to asking that question, am I making sense? Maybe you could say something more direct like, do you understand? Or do you need any more explanation? So this is something that works while you're typing and responds to you in the moment as you're typing, so that it's almost like somebody you're talking to was giving you the facial feedback that we are used to getting when we're talking to another person. That's the image that I like to think of, is that we are very used to feedback. And one place that we find that is in something called side tone. So on telephones, they found out a long time ago that if they had some of your voice mixed into the earpiece, you could tell that you were being that your voice was being listened to by the telephone. And when they take that out, people speak much louder. They also get a little more strident. And so this idea of a visual side tone, a communication side tone, that is giving you a little feedback about what somebody else might hear in your voice, is what this AI is doing. So, a lot of people like Grammarly work on legibility, and they'll do this great stuff. What happened? Like point out misspellings or grammatical problems, and it's very subtle, and many people love it very much. But there's a lot of literature that says that the tone of your communication is actually, a large part of your communication. And so, we respond if you say something like, "This is great." It's a smiley thing. If we say, it's perfect way to think about this. That's noticing that it's deferential, that you're saying something nice to, about the way people are talking about that. And the semantics are important. This is a hot topic? Is a response that is going to give, in some situations, with a smile, gives a smile, a mild positive thing, because there's not really anything feedback that will make it better in our view. So it's really been an interesting journey. We started off, saying we're going to get beyond shame, blame, and complaint, and so so our first feedback were things like this icon that looks grumpy, and he says too edgy when the person said women are not inspiring, or it said women are not intelligent. It'd say, really? It's this grump again. Women are not haters. Have you thought this through? And these are all kind of they're criticism, right? And so what happened after 13 rounds of feedback design is we got to something better. By the way, along the way, at one point, we were going to try to have inclusion be these two heads on these platters. I mean, it was supposed to be the women and men are balanced, but if you look at that, that's pretty gruesome image that we came up with. So it's often important to when you're making when you go to the icon factory, coming out with somebody else looking at your work and making sure that you aren't doing something really stupid. So this, now we're using this inclusive men and women thing for sexism. We're using an old and a young woman holding hands for ageism. We're using a very simple image for when things are neutral. That, as you can imagine, makes it a lot easier to look at these things. To give you, an image of what what it looks like in Gmail, here you are typing along, and there's something wrong with this. There's an ageist thing going on up here, and down here there's an apology that a person's made. So that's kind of not as not so good to be always making apologies. And so that's kind of an example of what you might see in Gmail. We've played around with it for video conferencing, and so if somebody says something that's racist or sexist or ageist or something like that, it might put up a little icon in front of their image that makes them kind of try to think about it, so that they recognize that they're maybe being a little bit scary to the people that they're talking to, and in that way maybe they'll soften their communication. Because in this case, where I'm talking to you guys, I actually am not hearing back from any of the 10 or 12 people that are in this meeting, although I'd be happy to, and I look forward to hearing from you guys soon. So when we were building this thing, we started off with, let me in fact see, yeah. So we started off with trying to distinguish tone with matching words. Sorry seemed like always about apology, except it isn't, because we often say sorry for your loss. And so direct word matching is not a great way to go. Some people use direct matching today, even in call center things, and in looking for bad information in communication on social media. We also tried repurposing some of the fancy AI tools out there. We tried to think about, things like Spacey and Hugging Face. They have pre-trained models around some of the topics that one would imagine, like hate. What happened to us is we found that, first of all, using several language models, these large language models that other people had trained, if you use a bunch of them, you start having a lot of lag. But also what we found is that the way they'd imagined hate being used wasn't the way we did. And so we started giving it a few examples with something called one-shot learning, but one-shot learning had a trouble with nuance. And so in the end, we are doing what we are calling multi-label training with large language models, like BERT is what we're using right now, and using these training models to make fine-grained, proprietary, but communication evaluation that really is starting to make a big difference in fact the way I'm communicating. So when I'm using my tools, I'm getting better now, and all the people that are working on it are seeing their communication styles changing. So very, very excited about that. And what you see here is this is kind of the sausage. We tried to start doing this in what's called ensemble learning, and this is a bunch of the different things we were training sentences. And here's some of the things we were training for: ageism, sexism, racism, and so on, positive, deferential. And so, starting out, we were looking through all of these and deciding how good we were at evaluating each of these things. And in the end, what you end up doing once you have a big ensemble learning system is you have to combine all of the different things, and the ones that are winning, the one thinks that it's hate and not racism or something, that one has to win and decide that it's time for it to say something to the user. And it also has to be a time that the person's ready to listen to by the user. And so there's something called a blackboard system, which is it's really a conflict resolution approach that AI has been using for a long time to have a lot of knowledge experts decide. And much more modern systems use voting between different machine learning models, and more sophisticated approaches like Bayesian nets that go into different states along the way. So we've been playing with all sorts of ways of combining multiple kinds of AIs to decide when it's appropriate and what to say to a person to support their communication. So what are the principles that you'd want to have for when to say things? Well, you have to know enough to comment. You have to be you want to be affirming, You don't want to be, you want to be ambiguous enough that the person doesn't get angry. You don't want to be negative. That just gets people, well, they feel insulted. You want to be short, simple, and timely, non-distracting visually or auditorially. And you don't want to, I don't like putting words in people's mouths. So that's this idea of this advisory agent that's teaching you instead of the assistant, the assistive assistant, the assistive agent that is driving the car for you into a white wall of some sort. So, and the really question is, if it does things for you, does it lose subtlety? And does it stop you from thinking if you are delegating? And does it disturb you? Does it get you off topic? And then the real question I like to think about is agency. I want people to feel personal responsibility and have agency. So I go back to this idea of side tone that I was talking about earlier. And I go back to talking about, this is being, we're taking us towards a path for peripheral computing. And I have, shown you some of my explorations into this. And there's been more. And there's, of course, this book and the workshop and a journal. You can go read more about it, or maybe just, this talk's enough. Just to say that I believe that as computers mature, they're going to be more socially appropriate, and they're going to be, more in the background, and letting us be people and letting us grow and learn together, because we care only about each other, and they have to be socially appropriate to us for us to be socially appropriate to each other. So thank you for that. And that's my discussion this evening about peripheral computing, and I'm welcome any questions. Okay, I don't hear anybody else. I hope people heard my talk.
I see.
Okay, Nancy, hello.
Sorry, here I am. I see clapping for your talk from several people.
Good, we like clapping.
Right, and maybe Carl, since you were the first one who's clapped, I noticed you have a comment about it, the talk, or a question for Ted.
Let's take someone else first.
Oh,
Okay. RV, you want to jump in? Brandel, okay.
I can go on something. I really like your emphasis on computers being advisors rather than sort of directing things and correcting people. One of the questions that I had, it's occurred to me as well that that pretty is often not as important as something that people can get their hands around and make sense of. In practice, have you managed to convince anybody who sells something of that? And if so, how do you do it?
well, I've been part of making many products. And, it's funny because I tend to only like to work on things that are a little bit controversial, or wouldn't happen without my intervention. And I mean, I say the track point is that example. Not only does it have a cognitive model in it, by the way, but it's sitting in the frickin' middle of your keyboard. I mean, who would ever let you put a new device in the middle of a keyboard? And, by showing that it made a 30% improvement in how fast you could do text editing while using your mouse, and that it had advantages over other pointing devices. I got it in. It took years, by the way, but it ain't. I mean, in fact, when I first made it, I made it completely the color of the keyboard, so it didn't even stand out. And a man named Richard Sapper, a famous designer, he said, "Make it red." And I was like, "Oh my God, I'm so scared." I'm already embarrassed about it being there. But I mean, the thing that people complain about with the track point is not that it's sitting in the middle of the keyboard, although that is something you would imagine would be a disaster. I don't know if that's an example enough for you.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if it's got evidence to point to it, then that's hopefully enough.
Yeah, the evidence is
Yeah.
it made billions of dollars. That was the good part.
Yes, helps. Thank you.
Well, I will just chime in and say that my pointing device is my foot. I do all of my mousing and clicking with my feet, not with my hands. And it works remarkably well. But my question is, who's funding all of this research? I mean, it sounds like interesting stuff to know, but who's putting dollars into finding these things out?
Well, I mean, I taught at MIT Media Lab for 10 years, and that was a lot of sponsors. Many of them found it exciting. I mean, Steelcase was a group that was very enthusiastic, for example. Herman Miller was also, Motorola, Lear, British Telecom, Microsoft, etc. So that hasn't been that's been good. At Carnegie Mellon, my funders were industrial often also, Samsung, Ericsson. Now I'm doing this work at Alfico. So this startup is actually my patron. Very, very proud of being the CTO of Alfico. So there's a variety of ways of getting things funded, but I mean, your point is maybe the stuff seems too far out. I actually think that the stuff is all very actionable. And I wish I was doing more activity with more of you to make these things into products.
Jump in there, Kevin. Come off mute.
Hi. So I really enjoyed the presentation. Thank you. I think the pressure is going to be, so I really like the idea of kind of a benevolent assistant that's going to be there to make suggestions and assist me, right? The difficulty is going to be, there's going to be a lot of pressure to monetize that. And there's going to be a lot of pressure to have suggestions. Oh, Kevin, have you thought of, et cetera, et cetera. And, I just want to raise that because that's a fact of the tech world we live in. And, obviously I'm interested in hearing any thoughts you may have on that.
Well, I think that's what we think of as true. But the best, I mean, I worked with a couple of different sales guys over the years, selling some of the technology that I made at IBM that made that was valuable. And the first one was this guy that had he'd throw his Lexus keys down on the table, he'd strut around, he was big and brash. We made no sales. The second one was this guy who would sit there and say nothing. And during the conversation, when the customer would say something they were interested in, he'd say, "Could I write that down for later?" And at the end of the meeting, having listened and been considerate, a contract would get written and we'd make money. So I actually think the opposite. I think that there's huge money to be made in being considerate and being and standing back and recognizing when it's socially appropriate to communicate and what you can do that's supporting the person you're trying to communicate with. Because when people don't feel supported, they actually don't get engaged. How about that? Do you have you probably have a comeback.
Well, so I mean, I don't disagree with that, but I guess what I'm saying is, with anything like this. So I mean, so an example obviously is you surf the web, right, and you see all kinds of suggestions for things, and there's just kind of my only point is, and I hope you're right, but my only point is there will be a lot of pressure on efforts like this to, inject certain things.
I get it. So I'll give you an example of that particular one. So I met these kids, and Larry and Sergey, and everybody else was like, Yahoo and Alta Vista were like putting advertisements all over their screens when they did these searches. And Larry and Sergey said, you know, I wonder if we could just put the simple facts up, if that might be more interesting to people than blaring at them with all this, with that advertisement. Now it's 20 years in, and they've, you know, there's more advertising, you know, creeping in all over the place, all over their website. But at the beginning, that really was their differentiator, is that they were somebody, they were not forcing you, pressing you, but rather letting you have agency. And there's still some of that. They're still better at that than some of these more blaring websites that I can think of. So I think that they might do better if they backed off a little bit, actually. You know, I think it'd be interesting to figure out how.
I hope you're right.
Yeah, well, let's work towards it.
Now, Harvey, I saw you had raised your hand at one point. Wait a minute, there's two raised hands.
We like raising.
Lisa and Carl both have their hands raised. You want to come in and say?
Hello.
Can I go?
Hey,
Lisa. Hi, Ted. Thank you for this. I really enjoyed this.
Okay.
Two things. One is, I'm wondering whether did you do any research at all on how the people who have used this were their communication and, you know, what they were like with other people were affected when they're not on a computer, you know, like, yeah, you get it, right? Okay.
Well, there's a bunch of stuff, right? One would like longitudinal studies, right? And you'd like to follow whether it was a fun thing and it trailed off, or whether they got better and better at it. And you know, anecdotally, I'm getting better. And back to this person that said, "Who funds this?" You know, in a startup, we can't do all of the research we'd like to do. We got to get a product out. But I think this is a, you know, the big goal, and it started early in my career, was when I was with my first help system. When we had the same help information given to people with an AI that did it appropriately and at the level that was right for them, people liked the help system better, same help presented in the same exact way, liked the language they were writing in better, and you know, did better on post tests about programming, and produced 5 times more exercises. So there's now, does that say that that's going to last? Well, the thing that did last is that they learned things. In other words, it wasn't just that they produced more exercises, but rather that they were actually able to answer questions better about the programming skills that they had been picking up. And at that time, it was especially exciting to me because people back then really believed, and it can happen, that putting AI responders in systems can be brittle, annoying, in your face, disrespectful. But I achieved doing the opposite in that system. Coach was the name of it.
So do you think that, for example, if somebody were autistic, like an autistic user, would this be helpful in teaching some, you know, helping with social skills?
Yeah, I mean, social skills, I actually had a student, a master's student, who was making a system for teaching autistics. Kathy Blocker was her name. And I think it's a very complicated thing, teaching autistic people. I mean, it's so funny. When Kathy started working, first she said, "Oh, I'm going to use Seinfeld examples." And I was like, the subtlety and complexity of those social situations is insane, right? That's why they're so interesting to watch. So, you know, back down to a smiley face kind of thing. Yeah, teaching autistics, I don't know if you've ever done it, but I have. And it's a very complicated thing. And I don't know if we have good solutions that are automatable yet.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Thank you.
I guess
Wanna-
I'll say one more thing that's really interesting to me about this is when you are teaching an autistic person, I don't know how many of you guys have done this. It is so difficult not to react to them with frustration because they are responding with socially inappropriate cues.
Mhm.
And maybe the computer will be more patient, if we program it to be. And even if it was a support for the person that's communicating with an autistic person to make them somehow remember to ignore the antisocial behavior, it would be amazing because even parents are pretty much, it's very, very difficult to learn to respond to a person that's socially inappropriate without judgment.
True.
We had Carl.
Uh,
Question?
Carl's been waiting patiently.
Oh, good.
Hi, sorry you caught me snacking there. So
Oh,
that's
do I get some?
so recently was reading an article talking about intergenerational communication problems that are occurring, for instance, and how texting is used or emojis and all such. I didn't know if you thought a little bit about how to perhaps bridge that gap or kind of smooth over the rough edges between those.
There's so many things there. Some of the things we are absolutely on. One of the things I say about ageism is they don't give you the big toys until you're 30, and then they take them away again when you're 52. So the generational things are very complex. Within a family, of course, there's weaning and there's puberty, and people want to get away from their parents. So that's just part of being a human animal, I think. And so that's hard to bridge, although some people do. And then there's the question of, language, right? And do we share a language? Do we share goals? Do we share activities? All of those are ripe places to work in that intergenerational support. And I'm sure there's industries that can be created around that, I think. And yes is the answer. Yes, this kind of technology, I think, should be part of that.
Carl, I saw probably the same article you were looking at, or some version of it. And I think some of these things are really interesting because the texting has become so ubiquitous and so much of the fabric of our communication, where we used to be voice all the time. And so you've got to find some mechanism. If texting is going to be this ubiquitous, you've got to find a mechanism to do what intonation does during speech, create breath groups, create the speaker's attitude toward the comments that they're saying as part of the whole thing. And that's what the emojis and the differences in punctuation among the generations end up doing. And the different line lengths and all those things that they have been talking about and noticing. However, until somebody does the analytics, nobody knows why, I'm so insulting to younger people, because I'm just writing, and I use ellipses, ... And so what's the big deal? But of course, the meaning, the interpretation of those line lengths and ellipses and lack of or presence of emojis actually has very distinct implications depending on your generation and how fluent in emoji you are, right?
So Edwin had a hand up earlier. I don't know.
I just want to say, I think that inspired me to actually write some lyrics to a song in emojis. Apparently there's, big things in trying to do movie titles and plots. And so.
Edwin, did you have your hand up earlier on purpose or not?
Let's see. That might have been the original raising hand for showing that this was interesting, but I did have a thought around your sleeve that could sense of course the difference between weights and, let's say, dancing, but along those lines, like one of the things that we've seen promise of perhaps, but maybe not delivery is sort of like tracking like people as they're exercising for their form, right? And this might be more about wearables and how you might do slight corrective moments in, as I don't know, peripheral cues.
Yep.
In that context, proper form for a squat.
So what's interesting, I think it's a very, very interesting area. And my first prototype of that, something like that, was I actually did when I was at IBM in 1996 or 7. But now it's actually becoming an industry. You can buy these mirrors and work out in front of them, and they do try to some ways to do some of this things you're talking about. And I hope they get better at this too. And certainly, it's I think it's a big, ripe, fascinating area. So that, I think it's interesting. Carl had his hand up. Is that gone away?
Well, I guess it's more a language issue in dealing with kind of phrases and stuff that are used to obfuscate typical sensors and such. It seems like so I didn't know, in terms of you're trying to soften language, how rapid you would have to respond to this type of changes. And
yeah, that's a really important question. And when you're talking to another person and they start looking down and they start, kind of their eyes start drooping or whatever, there's a lot of things that happen slowly. There's other things that happen very rapidly. And in conversation, some of the rapid responses you give, feedback, are too rapid and can be difficult for the speaker to respond to, because the person that's making those responses is a little bit too jumps too quickly, jumps in too quickly. But it's a complicated question. Because we've been dealing with, there's certain things you can tell very quickly and there's other things you can't. And if you look at the closed captions maybe below you today, you'll see that the last couple words, the closed captions is playing with those last couple words, trying to figure out that sentence. And it doesn't figure it out right away, nor do we when we're listening sometimes.
Mike Worth writes, and he's unfortunately in a noisy environment, so he asked me to read aloud for him. He's saying context awareness is a big deal for us. Military trainees spend a long time learning about situational awareness, which I suspect is much the same thing. And in all of these domains, making connections is ubiquitous, and thus the combinatorial complexity is enormous. So how do we go from toy problems, constrained environments with a few connections to examine, to real world environments?
So there's a lot of things in that statement. First thing I want to say is I'm a card-carrying conscious objector, and I do not work on military problems. But that has nothing to do with this question.
Right.
I like situational awareness when you're walking on a hiking trail or something. The thing that's interesting to me is in AI, there are some very hard problems. And on the other hand, socially appropriate feedback is a simpler problem, because people's tone and whether or not to speak and how to be affirming and not discouraging, those aren't as hard of things to come up with. And yesterday I was at a ski area. Actually, it was a very nice day. And there was, as I was coming off of the ski lift, there was this guy just standing there, a young employee, and he's saying, He said it to every single person. In other words, this is a fantastic day. You're gonna like have a wonderful time. There's 40 inches of brand new powder out here. And it was contextually, you knew where you were. You're at the top of a very fancy ski lift at a very fancy ski area on the very special day. And he was just saying, enjoy it. So he didn't need feedback from us. He knew who he was speaking to and what the effect of his communication was going to be, which was to affirm a very obvious known experience that we were all in part of. It wasn't a toy problem. I mean, it is play skiing, but.
So, Brandel, you have another comment?
Yeah, so you mentioned that you use sort of Blackboard, a Blackboard conflict resolution response thing to determine, I'm guessing, a single response at a given moment. Have you tried giving multiple and potentially conflicting responses, and what kind of impact do the two sort of approaches have?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Yeah, I mean, you take a look at the thespian, model where there's the smile and the frown going on, and it's really, fraught to communicate complexity to people. And that's and some people can deal with it, but it's I want to so badly, because there's always something positive and negative about every single thing. There, that's the way my mind works anyways. Nothing's completely perfect or broken. And so I think it's a very, very interesting topic.
I'm just checking the chat one more time.
Yeah, well.
And I want to say that we had several, Steve let me know that we had several people watching on YouTube side, in simultaneity with us, although they couldn't interact with us because we're not monitoring comments over there.
Oh, really? Well, that's good. Thank you, everybody, for
Yeah.
watching.
So you already had a more audience than you thought. Thanks, everybody, for showing up tonight. Next month, another fabulous program in January. Have a wonderful holiday season, and we'll see you after the new year. And tell all your friends. Show up at BayCHI second Tuesday of the month.
Good night, everyone.